Last year, on Christmas Eve, I found myself working late again. I was 23, grinding away in New York City, taking the train back and forth each day like clockwork. Being one of the younger people in the office meant I always seemed to get stuck with the worst shifts, and that day was no exception. I didn't even get off work until 5, an hour after my family had already left for my cousin's place, so I had to make the drive alone. I grabbed a quick snack in the kitchen, something just to hold me over for the half-hour drive, before stepping back outside into the bitter December air. I slid into my car, the cold leather seats sending a sharp chill through me, and punched my cousin's address into my phone's GPS. Halfway through the drive, the first flakes of snow started to fall, light at first, just drifting lazily across the windshield. But before long, the snow thickened into a heavy curtain of white. By the time I pulled up to my cousin's house around 6, the snowfall had turned relentless, hammering down in thick waves as I parked on the side of the street. I made it just in time to see everyone gathering around the table to start dinner, laughter spilling out into the warm light from the front windows as I stepped through the door. I grabbed all the gifts from the back seat, clutching them to my chest to keep the snow off, and stepped inside, brushing flakes from my hair and coat. I cheerfully called out a "Hey" to everyone, and a chorus of greetings met me as I set the gifts down and slipped off my boots. The evening went by in a comfortable blur of conversation and food. I stayed until around 11, long after the rest of my family had started slipping out the door to beat the snow. I hung around for an extra half hour, just enjoying the warmth of the living room and the soft glow of the Christmas tree, before finally deciding it was time to head out myself. By the time I stepped back outside, the world was transformed. At least 2 feet of snow had piled up, covering the cars, the sidewalks, everything, and it was still coming down, swirling around the streetlights like a thick white fog. It wasn't even close to stopping. The drive home was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. The roads were barely plowed, hidden under a layer of ice and fresh snow, and I found myself gripping the wheel tightly, creeping along at barely 20 miles per hour just to keep from sliding off the road. The world outside was silent and empty, the roads completely dead, most likely because everyone else had the sense to leave before the snow had really begun to bury everything. Eventually, I turned onto one of the main roads, the kind that would usually be alive with cars, glowing storefronts, and the hum of traffic even late into the evening. But at 11:15 on Christmas Eve night, the world was dead silent. Not a single car in sight, not a flicker of light from any store. The road felt abandoned, like a frozen ghost town swallowed by the snow. But then, up ahead, I noticed a set of flashing taillights, glowing red and hazy through the falling snow. They pulsed rhythmically, casting a faint red glow across the drifting flakes, illuminating the smoke that seeped steadily from the car's exhaust and tinted the air around it an eerie, blood-like red. As I got closer, I realized there was someone standing next to the car, waving an arm stiffly in the cold air, signaling me to stop. The snow was whipping around them, catching in the light, giving the whole scene a strange, otherworldly feel. I figured something must be wrong, that they were stranded and needed help, and, wanting to be a good Samaritan, I eased my car over and pulled up behind them. As soon as I opened my door, the cold wind hit me like a slap,
and the man was already striding toward me, moving quickly, giving me barely a second to plant my feet in the snow before he was in front of me. He was average in size, maybe 5'10", around 180 pounds, with a heavy coat dusted with snowflakes and a knit hat pulled low over his head. His eyes were shadowed beneath the brim, but his voice cut through the wind, loud and demanding. He asked me, almost barking, if I knew anything about fixing an engine. His tone made it feel less like a question and more like a command. I told him honestly that I didn't know much about cars, my voice shaky and clouding the cold air in pale puffs. The man snapped back quickly, not missing a beat, telling me it was fine, his words sharp and hurried, like he didn't want to waste time. He turned and went back to his car, yanking the driver's door open before disappearing inside for a second. A moment later, I heard the dull pop of the trunk unlatching, the lid lifting up to block my view of him as it settled into place, creaking slightly in the wind. The man reappeared, stepping back out, and told me to just wait by the trunk for a second. His tone was brisk, leaving no room for questions, and I found myself shuffling through the snow, confused, the cold biting at my face as I moved to stand by the open trunk. I had no idea what he wanted from me, or what exactly I was supposed to do, and an uneasy knot began twisting in my stomach. He walked around to the front of his car, and I heard the dull metallic clunk of the hood being popped open. The trunk blocked my view entirely, leaving me staring at the empty space around me, flakes collecting on my jacket and in my hair as the storm's wind howled in my ears, drowning out any small noises he might have been making. I stood there, shifting uncomfortably, the heavy silence between gusts pressing down on me as I watched the snow swirl through the red glow of his taillights, feeling a strange chill that had nothing to do with the cold, creeping slowly up my spine. I placed my hand on the back of the car, leaning forward slightly, bracing myself in the cold, waiting in the heavy silence for some kind of instruction. The air was sharp in my lungs, the snow swirling around me as I tried to focus on the sounds of the storm. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. 3 or 4 quick, aggressive footsteps crunching hard in the snow right behind me. Before I could even turn around, I felt a violent shove against my back, and I was thrown forward, slamming into the open trunk. The wind was knocked out of me, and the cold metal bit into my palms as I tried to catch myself, the world spinning for a split second as I realized what was happening. The man was trying to force the trunk shut on me, the lid crashing down as he pressed against it, trying to seal me inside. Panic exploded in my chest, and I kicked my feet upward with everything I had, fighting against the weight of the trunk pressing down on me, the snow squeaking under my boots as I struggled. I managed to overpower him, shoving the trunk open completely with a violent jolt, the lid bouncing back with a metallic slam that cut through the howling wind. I didn't waste a single second. Heart hammering in my ears, I scrambled out of the trunk, the cold air hitting my face like a slap as I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip them. He lunged at me then, reaching out with his hands, trying to grab hold of me, his face twisted with something between rage and desperation. But I didn't think, I just reacted. I tightened my fist around my house key, the jagged edge pressing into my palm, and I drove it as hard as I could into the side of his neck. The sound he made was sharp and raw, a scream that tore through the empty street and echoed off the darkened windows of the deserted stores, bouncing back to us like a ghostly chorus. He fell to his knees in the snow, clutching at his neck, his scream fading into a hoarse groan as I stumbled backward, the keys still clutched in my trembling hand. I was in my car and tearing down the snow-covered road before he could even push himself up from his knees, the tire spinning for a moment before catching on the icy ground as I sped away, the red taillights of his car shrinking quickly in my rearview mirror. A little further down the road, I pulled over just long enough to call 911, my breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps as I reported what had happened, my hands still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The dispatcher's voice felt distant and surreal, but I managed to give them the location before hanging up.
10 minutes later, I returned, the glow of blue and red lights flashing against the falling snow, illuminating the windows of the abandoned stores and casting strange, shifting shadows across the empty street. I parked a distance away, watching as the police surrounded him, keeping him pinned until the ambulance arrived, their lights reflecting off the snow like eerie beacons in the dark. I sat there in my car, watching the entire scene unfold, and in that moment, nothing had ever felt more satisfying in my life. Relief washed over me in heavy waves, mixing with the leftover tremors of fear that still crawled under my skin. Half an hour later, I finally made it home safely, stepping back into the warmth of my house, where I told my family everything. My hands were still trembling as I spoke, the images of the night replaying over and over in my mind, the fear still clinging to me like the cold. That Christmas, I was shaken in a way I had never felt before. The memory of that night seared into me. It remains, to this day, possibly the most horrific thing I have ever experienced. It was Christmas Eve, 2009. I was 18, working the closing shift at a CVS. Honestly, I hated it. Being stuck there alone until midnight on Christmas Eve felt like a punishment, and I had half a mind to quit over it, but my parents weren't having that conversation. The CVS was about 5 miles from my house, tucked away on a quiet corner at the end of a dead-end street. During the day, it was usually busy enough to keep the lights on, but once the clock hit 8, it turned into a ghost town, especially on Christmas Eve. I didn't expect to see a single soul past 8 that night. My shift started at 4, and for the first few hours, it was surprisingly busy. Customers shuffled in, picking up last-minute wrapping paper, stocking stuffers, and cold medicine, their faces flushed from the cold outside, rushing to get back to their families. But just like I expected, after 8, the store emptied out, and silence settled in like a heavy blanket. The pharmacy closed early that night, shutting down at 10 for Christmas Eve. The lights in the back clicked off, and the metal gate rattled down, sealing it off from the rest of the store. That left me alone, up front at the register, for 2 long hours.
I wasn't thrilled about it, but it was made worse by the fact that I had a crush on the girl who worked the pharmacy. We'd spent most of the evening talking whenever the store was empty, which was often, and I wasn't ready for her to leave just yet. Watching her grab her coat and head out the door left a hollow feeling in my chest, the quiet of the store suddenly feeling a lot colder. Time crawled by after she left. An hour passed, and in that entire time, I rang up just one customer, the beep of the scanner echoing through the empty aisles, followed by the soft rustle of the receipt printing. Then it was quiet again, the store lights buzzing faintly above me as I stood at the register, waiting, the clock ticking slowly toward midnight. By the time the clock hit 11, I was practically buzzing with excitement for my shift to finally end. I had been the only person in the entire building for the past hour, aside from that one customer, and the silence was starting to mess with my head. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a slight tap on the front window. It wasn't loud, and it didn't even sound intentional. It was more like the faint scrape of a zipper accidentally brushing against the glass, just enough to catch my ear over the hum of the store lights. I turned to look, squinting through the reflection and the dark outside. And that's when I saw him. He was standing there, right outside the window, staring directly at me. He wore a heavy coat with the hood pulled up, casting shadows over his face. His jeans were baggy, hanging loosely over a pair of black boots that were dusted with salt from the winter sidewalks. He didn't move, just kept staring, the cold outside fogging up the glass slightly between us. A few seconds passed before he seemed to realize that I was looking back at him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked over to the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in a burst of cold air that wrapped around me from behind the counter as he stepped inside. His eyes stayed locked on me as he walked past, unblinking, scanning me up and down before he turned down one of the aisles and disappeared behind the shelves. The faint squeak of his boots on the linoleum, the only sign that he was there. For 5 minutes, there was nothing, just the buzzing of the lights and the faint crackle of the speaker above me. Then, the tapping started again. It was soft but clear, a deliberate, steady tap, tap, tap coming from somewhere in the aisles. It was too rhythmic, too intentional to be anything else, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I listened. I shifted to the right behind the counter, craning my neck to get a look down the nearest aisle. Empty. The shelves were lined with holiday candy and boxed cold medicine, all perfectly still, no sign of him anywhere. But the tapping kept going, steady and deliberate, like he was trying to get my attention without actually showing himself. My mind raced, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, but it seemed to move, echoing off the shelves and the floor, impossible to pinpoint exactly. Every few seconds, the tapping would pause, and I would hold my breath, only for it to start again from a different spot. In the middle of all of it, I felt a sudden, uncomfortable pressure in my stomach. I really needed to go to the bathroom, the kind of urge that comes out of nowhere and won't leave you alone. But there was a problem. I wasn't supposed to leave the register to use the bathroom when there was a customer in the store, especially when I was the only one there to watch them. And I was alone with him. About 10 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of the customer. I hadn't seen him at all since he walked in, but every now and then, that weird tapping noise would echo from somewhere deeper in the aisles, soft and persistent, scraping at my nerves. It got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty as I wiped them on my uniform. I stepped out from behind the counter, my shoes squeaking softly against the floor, and called out, my voice cracking just a little. Excuse me?" The word echoed awkwardly through the empty store, swallowed by the buzzing of the overhead lights and the faint hum of the heater. I started walking down the aisles, peering around corners, looking for any sign of the man who had walked in. But every aisle I checked was empty, shelves lined neatly with holiday candy, cold medicine, and toiletries, untouched and still. But the noises kept happening. Every time I entered an aisle, I'd hear something shift or tap from the next one over. A box rustling, a faint bump against a shelf, the soft jingle of something metallic. It was like he was intentionally staying just out of sight, moving every time I moved, leading me deeper into the store. I turned down the candy aisle, my shoes crunching on a stray piece of plastic on the floor. And that's when I heard it. The sound of sleigh bells jingling, softly but clearly, from the other side of the shelves. It wasn't the faint random clink of a bell brushing against something. It was like someone was deliberately shaking them, just enough to let me know they were there. My breath caught in my throat as I moved closer to the shelf, leaning forward, trying to see through the tiny holes punched into the metal between the shelves, hoping to catch a glimpse of him so I could tell him to leave or at least know where he was. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Through those tiny holes, barely illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights above, I saw a pair of eyes staring directly back at me. Wide, unblinking, dark eyes that didn't look away when I noticed them. They just stared, cold and empty, watching me. Then, just as quickly, they shifted away, vanishing from the holes. My heart skipped, the silence that followed somehow louder than the bells had been. And then he stepped into the aisle with me. He was tall, impossibly tall, his heavy coat hanging off him awkwardly, and as he moved, he started making these strange high-pitched noises, giggling and muttering under his breath like a child or someone who had just escaped from a place where they were meant to be locked away. The sound was wrong, a twisted mix of a giggle and a whimper, and as he started to move toward me, he began doing this weird, jerky tiptoe hopping, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he came closer, his arms swaying at his sides. It might sound funny to hear it described, but in that moment, under those buzzing lights, with the aisles empty around us and the cold from the automatic doors still lingering in the air, it was anything but funny. It was straight up disturbing. And he was moving fast, too fast, closing the distance between us with those jerky hopping steps, his eyes locked on me, his laughter rising in pitch. A cold, sharp fear shot through me, sinking deep into my stomach as I realized I was actually starting to fear for my life. I started backing away from him, my shoes squeaking on the floor as I tried to keep distance, but he followed, mimicking my pace with that same weird, jerky hopping, his laughter echoing softly between the aisles. Every step I took backward, he matched, keeping his eyes locked on me with that unsettling, almost childlike glee. I made it back to the front of the store, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think straight, reaching for the phone to call my manager, or maybe the cops, whatever it took to end this. My hand was trembling as I picked up the receiver, but before I could dial, I glanced back at him. He was standing at the end of the first aisle, maybe 20 feet away, frozen in place. His face, which had been twisted into that goofy, eerily happy grin just moments before, shifted, the smile dropping as his eyes narrowed into an aggressive, cold stare that was full of pure malice. That was it. I was officially done. I slammed the phone back down and turned, walking straight out the front door, the cold air hitting me like a slap as I stepped outside. But as I cleared the doorway, I heard it. the sound of feet pounding against the floor. I turned, and to my horror, he was charging at me. Gone was the goofy hopping. Now he was sprinting, his boots thundering across the tiles as he barreled toward me, his face twisted in rage, his eyes locked on me like a predator closing in on its prey. I bolted, running out into the freezing night, the snow swirling around me as I gasped for breath, too afraid to head toward my car because I knew he would reach me before I could get the door unlocked and jump inside. Instead, I sprinted around the back of the store, my shoes slipping on patches of ice as I turned the corner, and I grabbed the back door handle, praying it was still unlocked. I yanked it open and slipped inside, slamming it shut behind me, twisting the lock with shaking hands. I didn't know if he was still chasing me, if he was just outside the door, or if he'd followed me around back, but I wasn't taking any chances. I ran through the back storage area, weaving between stacks of boxes and shelves, my breath coming out in sharp gasps, and made it to the front of the store, where I locked the front door as well, shoving the bolt into place with trembling fingers. That's when I picked up the phone on the counter and called my manager, praying he would answer. To my relief, he did, sounding groggy but awake. I told him, my voice shaking, that I had to leave immediately, that there was somebody crazy following me, and I wasn't safe in the store. My words tumbled out so fast they barely made sense, but he seemed to understand. Then, in the middle of my frantic explanation, I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, drifting over the sound of my own voice. I stopped talking, holding my breath, listening. The phone was still pressed to my ear, my manager asking if I was okay, but I couldn't focus on his words, because I heard the tapping again. That soft, deliberate tap, 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 coming from one of the aisles, somewhere deeper in the store. I didn't wait to see where it was coming from. I dropped the phone back onto the counter and ran, fumbling with my keys as I shoved open the back door, the cold wind blasting me in the face as I sprinted out into the night, my breath steaming in the frigid air. I was in my car and peeling out of that parking lot within 20 seconds, the tires skidding on the icy pavement as I sped away, not looking back, not even once. I never went back to that CVS. When I got home, I called my manager again and told him everything, still shaking as I sat on the floor of my room, trying to catch my breath. He called the cops, but surprisingly, nothing was stolen, or so I heard later from a friend. My manager wasn't exactly thrilled with me for leaving his store like that, and we never spoke again. I didn't care. I tried to have as normal a Christmas as possible, given what had happened the night before, but the memory of that man's eyes, his laughter, and the tapping that followed me through the aisles stayed with me, a shadow over the holiday I couldn't quite shake.